History of Fictitious. Volume 2. Story number 1. Golden Straw. Told by Samantha. Written by his pencil. Chapter 1. I took in the sweet scents of the earth as I picked red tomatoes. Carefully I set them inside my basket. My parents were in for a treat tonight because dinner would be divine and juicy. Nothing was sweeter than well-made vegetable soup. The wind blew fervently, placing a loose strand of my blonde hair in front of my left eye. It brushed across my cheek, itching my skin. I pushed the hair back behind my ear, thankful the rest of it was in a low bun. Unexpectedly, someone came up behind me and placed a yellow dandelion in my hair. I turned my head to see it was my best friend, Eliza. She giggled as I stared at her with surprise. Her usually light brown hair looked about the same as mine in the afternoon sunlight. "Good evening, Lady Bobo," I said, making fun of one of her favorite childhood poems. "What brings you out here today?" Eliza gracefully slammed down on the soil next to me. "I wanted to come out and enjoy the grass and blossoms. One of the blossoms is a valuable friend of mine." I shook my head, remembering all of the words in the poem. Secretly it was one of my favorite children's stories as well, but I would never dream of telling her that. She would smile and laugh and never let me forget it. "Have you already finished with your chores at the farm?" I asked. She started to pick some of the vegetables with me, placing them in my basket. "Actually, I only fed the chickens today. My parents insisted that I go wandering for a bit to enjoy the scenery, but I believe the real reason is because the young king is in the area. Apparently, they think I'm pretty enough to steal his heart." My eyes locked onto hers. I took her hand and said firmly, "And they would be right about that. You are everything the king of Amishi would wish for. You have such a sweet voice and a remarkable way with animals and children. I could say the same to you. You are good to your father and mother and work endlessly at their mill. But might I add, the king won't be looking for a farm girl or a miller's daughter. My parents are so amusing." While watching her speak, I saw a gleam in her eyes. I leaned in closer to get a better look. She backed up a bit, unsure of what I was doing. It became clear to me there was another reason she refused the idea of gaining the king's affection. "Who is he, Eliza?" I asked. Eliza blushed and proceeded to pick tomatoes. "What could you possibly mean, Sammy? There is no one. No one at all." My eyes widened when I thought of the boys she had spoken to over the past few weeks. One struck my mind more than the others. He was Eliza's ideal kind of man. Honest, caring, and not to mention soft on the eyes. "It's the merchant's son, isn't it? What was his name?" Eliza looked off to nowhere in particular, but her gaze told me she was envisioning the handsome boy's face. "Charles." I smiled, glad she was in love. They would make a splendid couple from what I had seen of them. It was always like magic surrounded the pair. Eliza then faced me with enthusiasm. "That doesn't mean you can't gain the king's affection. I've heard he is different from his cruel father, cuter too." Before I could help myself, I giggled. It was then my turn to stare off, trying not to blush too hard. Like every girl, I dreamed of meeting the young king someday. From what I knew of his rule, it had been just and true, compared to that of his father and grandfather who increased the hunt for witches. "When will he arrive in town?" I asked nonchalantly. Eliza looked up at the sun in its position. "Not too long from now, but he could already be here." Then she giddily looked at me and pulled me to my feet with a gasp. "We should clean you up a bit." I rolled my eyes. "Oh, I don't need to fill my thoughts with fairy tales right now. It simply isn't going to happen. What I need to do is prepare this dinner for my father's birthday." She sighed. "All right, I'll stop pushing." Then she remembered something important she had to do. "Oh, I almost forgot. Since I was so excited, Charles asked me to have dinner with him tonight." I took her hands and started to jump up and down. That's adorable. What are you still doing here?" Eliza laughed. "It isn't a rush to get back home. I still have 2 hours before he's coming. Still, go go go. You're the one who needs to clean herself up, not that you could ever scare a man away from you. I pushed her off in the direction of her house. Soon she started to dash off on her own, but she waved back at me before she became a tiny blur. She was such an amazing friend. I don't know what I would have done without her. My sights turned to the windmill ahead of me and a small house by it. I never really understood why my mother wanted the garden so far away from the house. Something about keeping fit or something goofy like that. As I walked over, I spotted some mushrooms off to the side in the forest. I couldn't help myself as I made my way to them. It would make my soup 10 times better. Once I got to them, I saw there were more of them further in. To get the taste I wanted, I knew I would need lots. Sure, there were stories about trolls and giants in the forest along with witches, but those were old and outdated. I was 20 and old enough to make my own choices. And I didn't mind a bit of adventure or action, not that I've ever been involved in either. Abruptly along my path came a ferocious hound dog. I stopped and scanned the dog as it did the same to me. It growled as I stepped forward. Its teeth were sharp, and I knew I didn't want to upset it. With what knowledge I had of Eliza's dog, I knelt on my knees, making it clear I was no threat. The dog crept closer but was still wary of me. I remained as collective as possible. When it reached me, I gently put my hand out so it could sniff it. The dog's nose brushed my skin, and its growls stopped as it licked my hand. A smile spread across my face as I rubbed the dog's belly. He spread out on the ground, clearly enjoying my company now that I had given him some love. I kept up my work until I knew I should go back home. Standing to my feet, I said farewell to the dog. It sprang to its feet and stared at me with sad puppy eyes. I shook my head, telling him no. Thankfully the dog stayed put and watched me sing my way through the forest. It wasn't too long when I heard the steps following behind me. My singing faltered as I turned to tell the dog to return to its owner. My sentence had barely begun when I saw the dog wasn't alone this time. With him was a tall young man with sharp features and a strong jawline. He had a crossbow on his back and hunting knives at his side. His blonde bangs were swept to one side, so I could see the brilliant blue of his eyes. I self-consciously wiped my hands down on my apron to get the dirt off. "Was that you singing?" he asked me. I only nodded, not sure what to say. He gave a dazzling smile, must be why he raced off again. He loves the sound of music. I do not think that is why he was following me, I answered. He found me earlier and I wasn't singing then. He didn't bite you, did he? The hunter asked. I shook my head. No, he snarled at me for a time, but we became quick friends. Ah, he must have found you enchanting then. I'm afraid he doesn't make friends easily. He's too mean for that. My eyes darted downward, though perhaps the hunter expected a laugh. If I wasn't mistaken, he was using his dog to tell me I was beautiful. I couldn't put together what I thought of that. All I knew was that his smile warmed my insides. "Excuse me, but I must be off," I said to him, bowing a little before turning away. "Wait, what is your name?" "If I may ask, that is." I didn't look his way as I stopped and said, "Samantha. I am the miller's daughter here." Just then, an older man riding a horse and carrying the reins of a spare horse crashed out into the open where we stood with the dog. The man had some rabbit meat with him, which I thought would pair well with my vegetable soup. He glanced between the hunter and me. His pale blue eyes were narrowed with disapproval. From his white-trimmed beard and fitted clothing, I was certain he was a noble. "Who might you be, standing before your king so dressed and scuffed up?" the older man asked. My thoughts were puzzled as I tried to make sense of the fact that the hunter was the king. Eliza did tell me the king had come to our area, so it shouldn't have been much of a shock. However, I assumed he would be traveling with a large company and a group of fawning women trailing behind. Yet, the older man was nicely dressed and the horse without a rider had an Amishi seal on the front with a doe. Once I got it in my head, I stumbled to the ground, bowing much lower to the hunter than I had beforehand. I could only see the dirt in front of me and the contents that fell out of my basket. I had never been so humiliated in my entire life. "Please forgive me, I did not know who you were, Your Majesty," I said to him. I heard a chuckle above me, then a hand came into my view. It picked up the contents that fell out of my basket and placed them back inside. I sat there, terror-stricken and baffled at what was happening. It only got worse when the hand took mine. I couldn't stop looking upward. By doing so, I trapped myself in his blue sparkling eyes. Whatever I tried, I couldn't pull away as he helped me to my feet. I knew I was far too close to the king. So close it would be effortless to steal a kiss from him. As we stood to our full heights, however, his lips went higher than mine. It wasn't by much, but the distance was enough to release me from my trance. Slowly I pulled my rough hands away from his remarkably smooth ones, but what less was there to be expected from the king? He signed contracts, decided the kingdom's fate, and used more of his brain than his hands or feet. Plus, if he did use his hands for long periods, he probably wore gloves. No, I believe I should be sorry for startling you. One does not see the king every day, and nor would they expect him to be a simple hunter they met in the forest, he said, meaning every word as he handed me my straw-woven basket. I felt my cheeks go pink as I took it. Then I remembered the proper manners I should be showing to him. I averted my eyes to the ground. Again I am surprised when his hand comes into my view and he lifts my chin. Trying to look down after that seemed pointless, so I looked back up. "There's no need for that. You are not a servant." I laughed, now setting my gaze off to the side, "but a commoner nonetheless, Your Majesty." From behind the king, the man on the horse added, "She has a point, sire, and I'd advise we continue with the hunt before night falls." The king looked at the sky, which had already darkened quite a bit, making me anxious to get back home. I still needed to cook dinner. And though everything told me I shouldn't speak, I had to. "I believe your advisor is right. I really must be going. My family will begin to worry, and I have to make dinner. I couldn't possibly miss my father's own birth." "You're making dinner," the king said, cutting me off, which for some reason didn't bother me in the slightest. However, it didn't stop me from stumbling out my answer. "Why, yes. Some vegetable soup." The king glanced at the man on the horse, telling the man what he was thinking with only his eyes. The man scrunched his face and shook his head firmly. Clearly, whatever the king was thinking, he didn't agree with it. "No way in Effa will I ever let you make such a rash decision. We came out here for one purpose and one purpose only, to clear your head so you can choose a proper wife. Ronald, I am the king of Amishi. You are my advisor. I respect that you're trying to protect me, but I am no longer the 15-year-old boy who lost his father. Besides, picking a wife from the available princesses is exceptionally problematic. One is a newborn baby and the other is an 11-year-old no one has seen since she was born. Of course, you could always include the princess from Effa, but we both know my father would come out of his grave and kill me if I married her. As for all the mermaid and fairy princesses, well, you've told me all about them too." The man, Ronald, sighed heavily. Then he waved his hand in the air, as a signal to the king. The king grinned and faced me. "Would you by chance enjoy having some meat in that soup of yours and more company at your table?" Once more I was shocked by the king's actions and what was happening to me. I knew I wouldn't dare say no to a king, but at the same time I too, like Ronald, realized that it wasn't customary. Plus I heard and took in every word the king had said to Ronald. Though I might have been wrong and felt vain even thinking about it, I believed the king fancied me enough to consider me a potential wife. My mind couldn't take any of this as reality, but I certainly didn't have the guts to dream of having a duke ask for my hand, let alone the king. It would be a true honor, but our house is small and not worthy for a king to step a toe in or poke at it with his staff, I said honestly. The king gave a cute smirk as he went to the spare horse Ronald had brought. He mounted it, then it galloped to me, extending his hand. Judging by what I have seen of you, fair Samantha, I'll bet the house's cleanliness is of a good order. My mouth gaped open a bit, not having any words left as I stared at the dashing king before me. I wanted to pinch myself and ask Eliza why she spread her romantic ideals over to me. It was driving my heart to its maximum rate. I took the king's hand, then the next thing I knew I was up on his horse giving him directions to my home. While we rode, he insisted that I had my arms around him so I wouldn't fall off. Soon it became clear that with my basket, it was an awkward endeavor. What would be more awkward though was when my parents found out that the first man I brought over was the king.